Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations. While the news the last few days has been frankly kind of nuts, with revelations that the modernists are using Benedict XVI's name to push the James Martin program on the church, despite, in life, his standing up against that movement for his whole life, and with the news that the government thinks traditional Catholics are a problem worthy enough of probably illegally monitoring them and spending huge amounts of resources on them, the ongoing antics of the Synod on synodality has gotten pushed into the background. Heretic bishops in Europe are pushing for radical changes to the faith to make it more in keeping with the flamboyant zeitgeist of the age. And now, conflict has erupted among the bishops at the big continental phase meeting in Europe, which has been held in Prague. The debates going on have caused the apologists for the Francis and James Martin program to get quite upset because it seems that some of the bishops still want the Catholic Church to be, identifiably Catholic, to have the same faith and values that the Church always promoted. I know you're as surprised by this revelation as I am, and the debate that has ensued has been quite remarkable. Let's turn to Vatican News for this. Vatican News is the official news agency of Vatican City. Think the NPR or the BBC or something like that, or what most people think those news agencies are generally supposed to be, unbiased and reporting the straight news. And you get the idea of what Vatican News does. So, headline: Synod on Synodality. Europe's Continental Assembly in Prague discusses tensions in the Church. Ah yes, tensions in the Church. If by tensions you mean the struggle for the faith to really be preserved, then yes, I guess you could call that state of affairs tensions in the Church. This piggybacks off of the recognition by the heads of the Synod, Cardinals Grish and Hollerich, that there are people who want to co-opt the Synod for their own purposes, which is Francis's way of trying to appear more moderate than the more radical elements within the synodal movement, who are all pushing for some pretty weirdo, bizarre, and heretical changes to be made to the faith, because they openly say that the Church and the faith need to change to be relevant, to survive. The Prague meeting is a big deal, though, as you can see from the article. Quote, 200 delegates, including 65 women and 46 bishops, are meeting this week in the capital of the Czech Republic for the last stage of regional discussions in the Synod on Synodality. On Tuesday, the second day of discussion, participants were asked to identify, quote, substantial tensions, questions, and issues that should be addressed by the Synod of Bishops at the Vatican in October. The delegates broke up into small discussion groups based on language, nation, and vocation, and then presented their conclusions in front of the entire assembly. One of the French-speaking groups brought up the tension of the role of women in the Church in light of the changing role of women in society as a whole, and in, quote, relation to the messages of justice that we want to proclaim outside of the Church. A young woman said that her German language group discussed the importance of youth involvement and, quote, the inclusion of all people who are on the fringes of the Church, offering up the example of how a group of young people carrying a multicolored flag to express the first deadly sin at the World Youth Day in Panama were insulted on the street. The moderator urged presenters to be as transparent as possible about tensions that emerged in group discussions. Time was also allowed for individuals to come up and address the assembly at the end. Archbishop Eamon Martin, the president of the Irish Bishops' Conference, spoke about the creative tensions between synodality and the hierarchy in the communion of the Church. One of the challenges facing a synodal church is learning how to foster that deeper communion in Christ between the people of God, the bishops, and the Pope, he said. Synodality should seek to affirm and enhance the teaching authority of the Pope and the bishops, not diminish it. This is Christ's church, not ours to create at will to our specifications, Martin added. Italian language groups noted that they perceived a tension between doctrine and pastoral care and a tension between truth and mercy, end quote. Oddly enough, the article doesn't make mention of the biggest driving factor of all the tensions being created as part of the so-called synodal process, though the young woman who spoke there sort of hinted at it. The fact that numerous bishops' conferences, including the Germans, are using the Synod to push a rejection of the moral teachings of the Church. Some bishops and countless laymen, including some very close to Francis, want the Church to adopt James Martin's position on that one topic that he has a really strange focus on. Look, it's really unbecoming for a priest to take such an interest in the sins that he is so interested in and to speak in defense of normalizing such sins in the Church. But that's where we are. And the synodal meetings in various countries all point to large numbers of laity wanting those sins normalized too. It's all very strange and has led to those tensions that the article spoke of. So over at Pillar Catholic, they do a better job of showing what really happened at the Prague meeting. Headline: Polish delegates warn of temptations to, quote, build some other church at Synod. The Synod on synodality must avoid, quote, the temptation to build some other church, a Polish delegate told Europe's Continental Assembly on Tuesday. You know, it's kind of odd that Vatican News didn't mention that, right? The Polish bishops have been accused of being basically mean and not synodal by various mouthpieces for Francis because they pointed out that the Church should remain Catholic at the end of the Synod on synodality. I know, perish the thought that the Church should actually remain the Church. Now, the Pillar Catholic piece does a good job of showing you the crux of these tensions, which illustrates the forces at play trying to tear the Church apart. Note, it's not trads trying to undermine the Church, which is what Rome seems to think. Quote, the goal of the discussion at the First Synodal Assembly in October 2023 should not be to succumb to the temptation to build some other church, but to seek answers to the questions of how to realize spirituality of synodality within the one Church of Christ, with its hierarchical structure, said the lay philosophy professor who is one of 4 Polish representatives at the February 5th to 9th meeting. He spoke the day after German leaders urged participants to consider adopting the goals of the country's controversial, quote, synodal way. Bishop George Botzing, chairman of the German Bishops' Conference, and Hermes Stetter-Karp, president of the Lay Central Committee of German Catholics, the ZDK, told delegates on February 6th that the Church needed sweeping structural changes in response to the Ted McCarrick problem and the subsequent trying to sweep it under the rug. Church leaders in Poland and Germany have disagreed openly over the synodal way, which has faced a series of Vatican interventions since it was launched in 2019. Polish Bishops' Conference President Archbishop Stanislaw Gadecki wrote a letter to Bishop Botzing last February expressing concern over the initiative's directions. The German bishop replied, assuring him that the German Church was not seeking, quote, renewal carelessly and certainly not outside the universal Church, end quote. Botzing has said that he wants to remain Catholic, that he likes being Catholic, whatever that means. But yes, the tensions are focused on the morality of the flesh. The Germans are and have been using the Ted McCarrick problem and the really terrible, horrific response to it in the Church to make an excuse for normalizing those sins James Martin is so interested in. It's a bit of a non sequitur, since those sins, being called sins and treated as such, have nothing to do with the Ted McCarrick problem. In fact, quite the opposite is true, actually. The data shows clearly that permitting men unfit to be priests into the priesthood because they have James Martin inclinations was the single largest contributing factor to that problem that the German bishops profess to be so worried about. But they insist that the Church must get with the times and change her teachings or risk perishing. They literally say this is an existential crisis for the Church, and that if the Church doesn't get on board with their goals, the Church doesn't get with the times and adopt essentially a secular value set, then the future of Catholicism is in jeopardy. And that, my friends, is how you know they don't have the faith, by the way. Christ told us that he would always be with us and that his Church would survive all the works of the devil against it. Maybe the bishops of Germany and their allies across Europe and in America and elsewhere should remember that. What do you think of these tensions? The Polish delegates spoke up for the faith, and the German bishops unsurprisingly tried to push their heresies onto the rest of the Church. None of that surprises me, but I'm curious what you think about all this. So let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. As does sharing this information on social media, it helps a lot too. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.